today for yet another interesting session from the Founder Stories series, where we bring in inspiring entrepreneurs to talk about their journeys. In today's session, organized by the PGPpro, Entrepreneurship and Consulting Club, we have a very inspiring speaker, Naiyya Saggi, who will take us through her journey while launching her venture. She's the CEO and founder of BabyChakra, which is India's largest platform for maternity and childcare. And the company is also a part of Niti Aayog's Committee on Maternal Health and Child Health. She's a graduate of the Harvard Business School, class of 2012, where she was a Fulbright and J.N. Tata Scholar. And prior to BabyChakra, Naiyya was a management consultant at McKinsey & Company and at the Bridgespan Group in Boston. So throughout her professional journey, she's worked extensively in the maternal health, child health, and education sector. She's also quite passionate about mentoring, and she's currently a mentor at the Facebook's flagship She Leads Tech program, as well as an advisor for ISP's incubator lab, D-Labs. Throughout the session, we'll be covering very many topics with her, and we request you to leave your questions in the chat window, and we'll take them up in the final Q&A round in the last 15 minutes of the session. So in the meanwhile, we request you to keep your audio and video off. And apologies in advance if we cannot take all your questions, but we'll try to get as many of them answered. And if there are any popular themes and significant themes that we've not touched upon, we'll try to connect with Naiyya later to address them. So thanks everyone for joining us again, and thank you Naiyya especially for coming on board as a speaker and giving us the opportunity to learn some interesting insights from you.
It's my pleasure, Tanvi. I'm so excited to kind of be back in school with all of you. I really miss those days. Actually, I think business school was one of the most fun times for me as well. So yeah, I think you guys are having a good time, and I love this idea of doing an entrepreneur series. Because I think it gives you a perspective and maybe like a behind the scenes view of what really goes down in some of the startups in India that are building in India.
Absolutely. And, we have a template of questions. We try to change it up for every entrepreneur, but we've realized that we get so many different insights, even on the same question sometimes. So that's why we thought of introducing this series. So we'll be talking about very many topics with you. But before that, can you take us through your journey in terms of your educational background and professional background before we launch into the big questions?
Sure. And let me take you like way back because I think you'll sort of see a few glimpses. I think journeys are really what make us who we are today, right? And I think my journey starts right from when I was growing up in Calcutta. I grew up in Calcutta. My mom was in the Bengal cadre. She was an IAS officer who'd one of the very few women, at that point in time who I could look up to and, who actually was a role model to many other women around us as well as a family, right? So I think I grew up with a very strong sort of woman in my own family who kind of guided us and sort of, led the way on all the themes that I think, we talk about today, which is women in the workforce, women in leadership roles, women, being equal parents at home, etc. I sort of saw that role modeled in my family with my mother. So that was a very, I think, important part of who I was when I was growing up. After Calcutta, I went on to National Law School. So I studied, my undergrad was law, which was, again, I think, a choice that I made because I was extremely passionate about creating impact. And law seemed like a great place to be, to create impact at scale. After law school, I was fortunate to have two job offers, one with McKinsey & Company, which was, frankly, at that point in time for me as a lawyer, like an unknown brand. I had no idea what McKinsey was. But they came in, gave a really kick-ass presentation about how we'd be working with multiple boards and CEOs and, solving problems at scale. And I had another offer with a law firm in London, which I kind of deferred for a year and joined McKinsey to test the waters. And I loved consulting. I loved the process of really working in teams and, solving business problems and, looking, I think, especially from a leader's perspective. So we were very fortunate to work with a lot of CEOs and, sort of CXO roles. So sort of see from their perspective, what are the problems that they wanted to solve. And I loved that process. Also at McKinsey, got exposed to public health in a very meaningful way. Worked for the Gates Foundation, worked for EMRI, which was this ambulance service, 108, which had started off in Hyderabad, and then we scaled across 10 states in India. Worked on a secondment with the Public Health Foundation of India, set up a center of excellence for them in maternal and child health. So sort of really found my passion and my calling in healthcare, I think, at McKinsey. I think it was formative in more ways than one.
Yeah.
And then went on to business school at HBS, where I was fortunate to go on a scholarship. And I joke about this, and my mother jokes about this, Tanvi. If you saw my marks in class 10 and class 12, you would never think this girl would get to go to, like Harvard and go on scholarships, etc. So I think, many times the people reach out to me saying my marks are so bad in class 10 and 12, or I'm not academically inclined. I'm like that, in India, there's so much of a myth about academics sort of being the only moniker for success.
Absolutely.
Or for, achieving what you want to achieve and what you aspire to. So I really hope for all the people who are listening in and were probably maybe, not really academically inclined or really crappy students, I hope I can sort of give you some assurance that life is not that bad after not doing that well academically. Anyway, so that was really my life before BabyChakra started. And, when I was in Boston, finishing up my business school degree, I think a couple of thoughts came together, which was that India was really exciting at that point in time. It still remains exciting for us, right, to build in. And to build something that would be large, it would be valuable, but also have massive impact, right? There's so many needs in India to be served. And I think the second piece was, I think there was a bit of a transformation in the way I thought through how to think about building as well, right? Because I'd gone saying, I want to create impact. And for me, impact was always about, joining a nonprofit or working with the World Bank or working with the UN or working with the government.
Yeah.
And then, there was this conversation I had with a business school professor, which was at that point in time, the big sort of heated debate between us, which was, what company do you think is creating the most impact today? And, one of the most counterintuitive examples he gave me was actually Airtel, right? He was like, Airtel's actually democratized data and opened out for a lot of small businesses and individuals in different geographies, opportunities never had access to earlier. So I think this whole sort of profit oriented company model with, I think, the whole focus of that solving unsolved needs and creating impact, I think that really stayed with me.
Right.
So, so I think, long story short, I think driven all my life by the whole sort of mission and the excitement and sort of this whole thing about creating impact and whatever I do, that's really what energizes me.
Yeah.
And I think I found my calling in what I'm doing today in BabyChakra.
That's amazing. I think I just did the other day, I read a quote by Jeff Bezos that you can either live a nice and a comfortable life, or you can live a life of service and passion. And you clearly have chosen a life of service and adventure. But during your time at Harvard Business School, and by the way, I'm really glad to know that marks don't always count in the end. It gives me some hope. But most of us, most of the attendees today are MBA students, and we're also looking at how we can leverage all the resources available at ISP, especially to help us in our entrepreneurial journey. So during your time at Harvard Business School, what particularly how did that help you with launching a company and learning to become an entrepreneur?
So, I think, so ISP is a 1-year program, HBS is a 2-year program, right? And I think for me, I think the 2 years was really helpful because the way we split up our time was that the first year was more getting to know the HBS environment and sort of all the access to professors and to knowledge. And I think a lot of the peer conversations, right? They were extremely critical. And let me give you one example, right? My first day, which was, we call it the RC year. My first day, sitting, I looked to my left, and the guy sitting next to me is actually a Navy SEAL, right? And I looked to my right, and the guy next, the girl next to me had actually been a doctor in Iraq, right? So it was crazy. I mean, those were sort of, exposures and experiences and conversations, which I think it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible, right? And I think, in the RC section is divided in a batch of 80 people. So you get really, really close with all your classmates because the whole process of teaching and learning in HBS is so conversational, right? It's a set of conversations, set of discussions, set of debates, right? So you learn to question, you learn to be even more curious than what you naturally would be.
Yeah.
And I think the perspectives you get, you realize that there's no one right answer. Right. I think that was an extremely important sort of takeaway from me, which was, growing up in India, this whole thing about find the right answer, solve the math problem, like get to the right formula, right? There is none, right? It changes, right? And it's based on different perspectives and different contexts and different situations. So I think the conversations with my peers in my first year at HBS, I think that provided me, I think, this very incredible insight that there is no right answer. No one knows the right answer. So eventually, as a leader, you're actually making decisions in ambiguity, and you have to make your peace with it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think it was the first sort of takeaway. And, I'd suggest the same for all the folks listening in. Don't look at ISB or don't look at anything you do actually in life to like lead you to right answers. Figure out the way, like life will always be ambiguous. And I think we're living through an extremely ambiguous time ourselves right now, right? But I think take each day as it comes and sort of solve for that day and solve for, keeping in mind, of course, a medium long-term goal, but solve for that day and be comfortable with the ambiguity you're solving it in. So I think that was the first sort of set of learnings I had in my first year. And I think the second year was more about the overall sort of ecosystem of Harvard. Because I chose Harvard as well, Tanvi, because, it has the Harvard School of Education, School of Public Health, the Harvard Med School, the Harvard Undergrad School, the Harvard School of Design, etc. Right? So did a lot of electives across all of these schools, really sort of absorbing knowledge and sort of really getting perspectives to things like, like we did a class with Professor Tarun Khanna, which was an undergrad. It was like a mixed class, cross-registered course. So we had folks in from undergrad and folks in from, public health, etc. But the class was all about the history of India, right? And like how that sort of shaped the economy, how that shaped our cultural values and the way we think, etc. Right? So it took us back to like the BCs and then came down to present day India, right? So I think that was there's such a joy in sort of being exposed to, a very, very different way of learning. And I think that curiosity that Harvard really sort of, I think, inculcated in all of us, that's not something that's only restricted to Harvard. I think a student in like an ISB, which is the most premier B school in India, I mean, it's just about finding like interesting conversations, accessing people who can give you access to insights, reaching out to them aggressively and with like a bit of humility, and then having those conversations, right? So I think to summarize, I think two things I took away from HBS, which I would love like to sort of share with the ISP folks is, number one, really, really this thing about peer learning. It stays with you all your life, and peer learning really helps, especially in situations of ambiguity as a leader, right? And I think the second thing is like, don't let go of curiosity, for sure.
No, I especially like the part that you mentioned about having ambiguity, because I come from the supply chain and procurement background. It's as organized as it gets. So I was very uncomfortable with ambiguity, but I realized that, sometimes that's the basis for creativity and innovation. So it's quite important in your life. And so during your whole journey, when and how did the idea for BabyChakra first get conceived? How did you come up with it? And what compelled you to leave your successful consulting career to start your own venture?
So again, I think I'm very much, and I think that's the other sort of realization I've had along the way. And I think everyone has their own set of realizations, right, as to what gives them happiness. Right? It all boils down to that. It's what gives you happiness, right? And I think what gave me happiness, and as I sort of talked about, my sort of formative set of experience was, number one, creating impact, right? But of course, creating impact with, with value, right? So I realized very early, like, through my HBS experience, that I didn't want to join a nonprofit and sort of, get frustrated with the whole process of impact, at least for me at that point in time, being, dependent on things around like, getting funding or, sort of, doing things where I wasn't in the master of my destiny with the process of building, right?
Yes.
So I was quite clear on that. And I realized that really is what, would give me happiness if I could build something which was valuable as well, which would, scale on its own, which would, also, add value to people's lives, right? So all of these three sort of things came together. And I think the second piece for me in terms of the sector was very clear. I mean, I had worked in healthcare, as I'd mentioned, at McKinsey, done a secondment at the Public Health Foundation of India, saw that there was a massive opportunity in the healthcare ecosystem across multiple, spaces. One, of course, in the digital ecosystem as well, because when I was looking back at India, I was realizing that women were going to come online in a very, very meaningful way, but no one was really creating digital products for women, right? There were all products being created by men, for men. So things like, auto became very big. If you remember, auto startups, etc., like, car discovery, car comparison startups became very big at that point in time. Things around, share trading, share markets became very big because they were largely, for whatever the reason, the domain of a certain cohort of men, etc., right? So there were no products being created by women for women, right? So I think that was exciting to me as well, because I mean, of course, data democracy has to happen. Women will have access to data one day or the other, and they will go online. And when they go online, one of the first ports of call for them will actually be conversations and questions around healthcare, right? And critical choices there. So I think that was the second piece to it that really sort of made me excited about coming back and building, a healthcare-based platform centered around the most critical needs of a woman at the time of pregnancy and parenting.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you first started thinking about it and decided that you wanted to launch this platform around, women healthcare, what were some of the typical challenges that you think a first-time entrepreneur needs to be prepared for based on your own experiences?
So entrepreneurship is not easy. It's tough. And I think you need, like, I think as an entrepreneur, and if you decide to go down the pathway of entrepreneurship, there are two basic questions you need to ask yourself. One is, does the process of building give you joy and happiness, right? Because it really, I think over the last 4.5, 5 years that I've been building BabyChakra, I think it's been that process of building that's given me the most joy, right? And I think that's a kira that kind of bites you. And if like, I think you have to be really self-aware that building is tough. It's never easy because it's not based on anyone else's foundation, right? You're starting from scratch. So I think that's the first piece. You have to be at peace with yourself, right? As an entrepreneur, or if you decide to go down entrepreneurship. And unfortunately, it's like this, right? I mean, until you do it, you don't know also, right? It's not like, that yes, the process of building gives me joy, like just, sitting and like sort of listening to me, right? You have to do it to like really see whether it gives you joy or not. Right. And you'll probably like take, 6 months to about a year to really figure out, okay, this is the pathway I want to go down and commit myself to. So I think that's the first thing as an entrepreneur you have to be really cognizant of. And I think the second thing you have to be cognizant of is, that you're not doing this alone. You have to think about the ecosystem you're building in. Of course, like right from what you're building. So what's the competitor landscape looking like? Are you fooling yourself in terms of like what you're building and how you're prioritizing your efforts into a direction? Number two, who's supporting you in what you're building, be it either a capital or be a team, right? So how do you sort of figure out the right ways and the right sort of processes to attract the right capital, or to work with the right capital, or to attract the right team and work with the right team, right? And I think the third piece in this journey as you're building is also like constantly learning to test, right? Because entrepreneurship fundamentally is creating value out of finite time and finite resources and finite capital, right? So everything is finite. In a situation that's finite, how do you derive the most value and most success out of that finite structure and construct, right? So constantly sort of piloting, constantly sort of being agile enough to pivot. I think these are the two like broad things I would say as an entrepreneur you have to be mentally ready for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's quite important. But in terms of emotional, like personal conflicts, was there anything that, apart from, like you said, you have to be self-aware to understand that you want to build or not? I mean, do you have that entrepreneurship key in you, like you mentioned? But apart from that, were there any personal conflicts and challenges that you went through that you can share with us?
I mean, I think that'll always be there. And like channel back to like, this is 2015, right? When I'm starting off BabyChakra, right? So it's a while back. And if you think about it, coming back from the US at that point in time was like, what are you crazy? Like you've just had like, a scholarship support you. So you don't really have, debts to pay off as such, right? So you can actually be in the US and like enjoy, take on whatever career you want, take on like an amazing professional, like, I don't know, join like a venture fund there, join a hedge fund there, whatever you want to do, or continue consulting, whatever you want to do, right? So I think, one very funny in hindsight and interesting sort of backlash I actually faced was from my Nana, who refused to talk to me for like about a month or 2 months after I came back to India, saying, you're wasting your life. You're wasting the opportunity you have, which is very funny because he's actually the most progressive. He was the most progressive man I know. So it was extremely hilarious. And I think it was a conditioning, right? We grew up in Calcutta, or we grew up in India where if business, right? Business families, business was looked down by the professional class for whatever reason, right? Entrepreneurship was this thing people took up if they couldn't find roles or jobs anywhere, right? I mean, that was the conditioning like our parents and our grandparents grew up with, right? So it was
Yeah.
interesting. It was like a funny kind of a personal situation. But I think, of course, I think on a more serious note, there is always self-doubt, right? And you might have an amazing family construct like I think my family has been incredibly supportive of my choices. They don't understand it entirely, but they've been very, very supportive. And I think the reason they don't understand is like, why do you go through so much pain, right? Because there's a lot of pain every day, right? I mean, you're really putting yourself out there, and it's a painful process, right? And I think it's never you put in a lot of yourself for maybe a return that's again ambiguous, right? So I think they don't quite understand the decision, but I think they get it. They also know I'm very stubborn. So I think they get it, and they don't like, they've given up questioning me. But I think that self-doubt that you have as an entrepreneur, right? I think that's something you to constantly challenge and battle every day. I mean, there have been days, Tanvi, where I've woken up in the morning and I've just felt like curling back and going to sleep again because I'm like, I can't face the day. I just can't face the day, right? It's too tough. And that's actually something that more and more entrepreneurs are now finally opening up about, right? In their close peer groups. So, fellow entrepreneurs who over time I've developed very, very deep relationships with, because we're going through the same grind, right? We talk a lot about how everything seems glitzy on the outside. Like a startup seems sexy, entrepreneurship seems amazing. Being a founder, you're on the press, you're on the news, right? But, eventually the buck stops with you, and that's a massive responsibility. Right. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that the conversation has started around, how much pressure entrepreneurship is really is, because, earlier it was understood that, you need to keep the best foot face forward for your investors and users. And if you don't look not confident, then how are they going to join you in your challenge? But I'm glad there's a conversation opening up around that. So apart from the personal relationships in your life, I'm sure you already also work with a lot of varied stakeholders, be it your investors, your teams, your family. How did you manage the expectations of so many varied stakeholders who had different mindsets and different motivations from compared to yours?
Yeah. So, one of my first, again, I think I've talked about this somewhere publicly, and I'll say it again. One of my first interactions was with, an angel investor who basically asked me the question that what happens to the company when you become pregnant, right? And I was just like, really? I mean, wouldn't it be great for the company? Because after all, we are about maternity and child health. But I think it was the first time actually in my professional career I had been judged on or sort of questioned on my gender and the impact that my gender would have on my commitment levels. Right. I'd never had that question before. And, and sort of channel back to like, 4.5, 5 years earlier, right? I'm coming back really confident saying, hey, like all our business schools tell us, right? You're going to be leading the world and all of that, right? So you're future leaders. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a future leader. Like, I think suddenly this question was like, what, do you not understand that I'm ambitious? I'm here. I've made choices to really make it big, right? I mean, that's why I'm here. And I think it was one of those moments for me where I realized that, things are not always going to be fair, and you have to deal with things not being fair, and you have to make the change happen. Right. Again, the buck stops with you as an entrepreneur. So I think also what ends up happening is you talked about investors and teams and, partners, etc. Right. Two things I've taken away. Right. First, there's a lot of luck in being an entrepreneur, which we underestimate a lot, right? I feel I've been very lucky in finding investors who have found me, right? And who we've partnered with over time, I did get pregnant, by the way, about my child is now 14 months old. But when I got pregnant, I mean, my investors were actually super happy because they were like, this is great for the company. Can we do all our photo shoots now? Can we do all the press now? And then of course, like things were in a certain stage. So it was a good place for us overall, right? So I've been lucky to find investors who get what I'm trying to build and who I am. I'm very lucky to have a team that, also is excited about what we're building, is very, very passionate about, like, every day we see impact, right? Every day we see, actually like it's funny, right? We have this thing internally called BabyChakra babies. So we've actually had mothers go through their journey of pregnancy, and then, the first image of their child is always put up on BabyChakra.
Oh,
right. So you literally see, like every day you see hundreds of little newborn babies on the BabyChakra feed, right?
Oh,
Which is
wow.
crazy. Like, I mean, it's such a privilege, right? You have an insight into such a precious moment into a family's life,
Yeah.
right? And that
Yeah.
means you also hold such a strong position of trust with the family, right?
Mm.
So I think that the team gets inspired by seeing all of this, right? And of course, the team also self-selects, right? I think they know that the boss here is a woman. So I'm sure like a lot of applications that come in are already self-selected applications saying, hey, I'm excited about working with a woman who's like, out to like sort of create impact or do something different,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So I think we're lucky, right? It's good fortune. Like we don't have to like sit and like drill like our CVs out and say, will this person be committed or not? Because I think a lot of that is already like kind of done by the person leading the organization. Do
Yeah.
they connect with that person? Do they connect with the impact? Do they connect with the mission statement? Do they connect with the background the
Mm.
leadership team comes from, etc.? So I
Yeah.
think we've been very lucky along the way. And of course, I think the third thing that I do want to call out though is that I've also learned to call out bullshit, which I think is extremely important because,
Yeah.
as I think as a professional and also maybe as a conditioning as a woman, whatever said and done, you're always told to be the good person, the good girl. You're told to like make people happy and like, have everything hunky dory. And, business is real, right? Companies are being
Absolutely.
built on real money, on real time, on real efforts, on real like mission statements, right? So
Mm.
eventually, I mean, if I'm the founder, I have to call out bullshit and I have to say that, listen, this is not going to work, right? Or like, let go of some people when they're not performing,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Or have really tough conversations with my investors or with my stakeholders and partners when I think something is really not going the right way,
Yeah.
right? So I think it's a complex relationship overall with people and with individuals,
Mm.
but it's a relationship that actually can determine whether the company moves forward or not, right? So it's an
Mm.
extremely,
Mm.
I think one of the biggest parts of entrepreneurship is being able to work with a lot of different kinds of people, uh, not have self-doubt in yourself, as I'd
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, and also I think just make peace with the fact that things are not always going to be fair.
Yeah.
You will have luck. At that point in time, you don't question fairness. Right?
Yeah.
Luck comes, you're like, yeah, I'm
I
lucky,
deserved
right?
it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
deserved it. And when things are not going your way, like don't question that either. Like make it work.
Mm. Wow, that's a good insight. And thank you for sharing that story, as you mentioned about what the investor asked you. And these are not the stories that you hear often about entrepreneurship. So thank you for sharing that with us. And especially on when you mentor women at Facebook She Lead Tech, what insights have you gained, especially about women entrepreneurs, that is slightly different from the rest of the entrepreneurs?
So actually, most of the women I met at She Leads Tech and also the most of the women I meet today are amazing. They're incredible. I mean, I think, and I think not just women, by the way, even the men I meet, right? Because I end up mentoring a lot of men as well. I mean,
Yeah.
again, I think like for me, it's like, I look at, an entrepreneur is an entrepreneur. And like, I think there's a kida that you can identify like from a mile and say, this person's going to make it, right?
Mm.
You can see that. And I think with both men and women, I'm constantly inspired, right?
Yeah.
Especially the ones I see today, especially the new entrepreneurs I see building today, because I think they're so much more sorted. They're so much more aware. They're so much more curious. They're so much more ambitious also
Yeah.
than maybe the ecosystem was maybe 3 or 4 years back when I was starting off, right? The networks are so much more developed,
Yeah.
right? There's some pathways that have already been set. I think the ambiguity also
Mm.
around entrepreneurship as a career, right, has been taken away a little bit, right,
Yeah.
from previous experiences. So I just look at these amazing men and women who reach out and they're like, here's what I want to build, and what should we do, right? How do we
Mm.
think about it, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's been amazing. I do think though that, I mean, to your specific question, Tanvi, I do think that when I sort of compare women and men in many ways, the woman is actually if as ambitious, if not more than the man. But in articulating her ambition, there's a lot of hesitation,
Mm.
right? It's like, I want to build something which will be amazing, but like, all right, like, do you want to make this really big, or what's your aim, right? Because a lot of times women come back saying that I'm not really sure whether this will be successful or not,
Mm.
right? And what happens if it's not successful? My point is, like, in entrepreneurship there can be no plan B,
Yeah.
right? So don't even think of the plan B, because the plan B is going to hold you back. Just go saying, this is it, I'm going to make it big, I'm going to make it successful. Just go for it, right? And in your conversation with investors or with partners or with team members, right, they should not see any hesitation. And
Mm.
that if that hesitation doesn't come from you, they will not see it. right? So
Absolutely.
don't think of a backup plan. Think like, this is it. If I'm committing myself to this, give yourself a finite timeline, but commit yourself to this, and don't be hesitant about your own ambition and your potential to achieve it.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's a really good insight. Thank you so much. But a lot of our attendees today are women and mothers who are doing the ISP course along with, working on their careers. And we live in an imperfect world where, the mothers end up contributing sometimes a lot more than the fathers in parenting a young child. So what advice would you give the mothers attending this session in, keeping up with the fast-paced corporate life or in a life of an entrepreneur and raising a young child?
So I think what one of the biggest challenges for women, and not just in entrepreneurship but in the corporate world as well, was this whole thing about how do I balance out my professional aspirations with my personal aspirations, right? Because um, I mean, it's not just that I mean, as a mother, I would have personal aspirations for my child as well, right? And my relationship with my child, right? So it's a lot more complex than just saying, hey, I have a nanny and I have like a good daycare, etc. I think it's
Yeah.
also about wanting to be there for your child at some critical moments in the child's development and the milestones that the child is going to take, and be part of them, even just for your own joy and for your happiness, right? uh, that said, I'm seeing a lot more men also have the same aspiration, right? So this
Mhm.
question actually applies today both to men and women in many ways, Tanvi. And I think that's the interesting piece, right?
Yeah.
So I think one thing that, we should demand more and more of as professional women is that our partners, right?
Mhm.
Be a partner, be another woman, or be it another man, right? I mean, they need to be equal partners with us, right? And it's interesting until you demand that,
Yeah.
right, from the paradigm you work in. So at home it's your partner, right? At
Mhm.
office it's your team or your boss,
Mhm.
right? Until you demand this, what you need by way of support, right? Or until you brainstorm like what are the right structures, no one knows you're facing a lot of these
Mhm.
challenges. Let me give you an example, right now we're saying work from home is amazing because women are going to be able to work from home much easier, and therefore more women will enter the workforce, etc.
Mhm.
Sure, I mean, all that's going to happen, but like, look at the short term, what's happening, right? You don't have daycares, you don't have play schools, you don't have schools open. A lot of the burden of, like, I mean, unfortunately, cooking, cleaning, childcare is still falling on a working mom who's sitting at home and, sitting in front of a laptop trying to meet targets, right?
Yeah.
So it happened in BabyChakra as well, right? We had a mom who basically came up and she was extremely stressed and she was like, Naiyya, I don't know what to do, because while my husband's amazing, like both of us have equal responsibilities, but sometimes my child just needs me, right?
Mhm.
Especially during meal times, for instance, etc., right? So I think what we had to bring, I didn't know this, right? I didn't know this because,
Yeah.
I mean, I might be woke and all of that, but I don't know enough about what happens in people's personal lives, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the fact that she was amazing enough to have that conversation with me means I could solve it with her, right?
Yes.
So then we solved it. We were like, listen, why don't you do like calendar blackouts, right? Saying this is personal time off, so it's PTO, right?
Mhm.
So literally, like, there are times in her calendar where no one can schedule a Zoom call or a Google Hangout or a time, like whatever it is, and
Mhm.
it's blocked out very easily, very very clearly on her calendar today, right? And that gives
Mhm.
her the mind space and the ability to be present for her child when the child needs her,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I think you have to call out, you have to start talking about what are the challenges you're facing.
Yeah.
And hopefully, like, the ecosystem you've surrounded yourself with is a good enough ecosystem that respects you and respects your ambitions and can make space for that. And by the way, if it's not, you should really think deeply about whether you want to be part of that ecosystem in the first place, right? Be it
Makes
the
sense.
role you're playing in a company, or be it, I mean, honestly, even in the work setting and the home setting, sorry.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. So I guess moving on to when you built Baby Chakra, how did you go about selecting your initial team, and how did you work out the remuneration mix with them? Could you share
Yeah,
that?
sure. So again, like I said, I got really lucky. I mean, so, when you're building out a company in the very first, again, like, I think you don't have as much capital. You're pretty much putting in, and I did a friends and family round, I think, for my first very, very initial
Mhm.
round, right? It was a very small amount, and my friends and family were like, whatever you're building, we want to back. So I said, okay, great, thank you. Very much appreciated. So it was a smaller round, but I think it gave me a little bit of leeway to move forward and to hire a few specific team members. So
Okay.
at that point in time, we made a very clear decision that we might, like, and I, like, at McKinsey, we had this matrix called skill and will, right? So
Mhm.
if you're like high on skill and will, like, you're like this amazing asset to have in a team, right? You're like an
Mhm.
amazing team member to have. And we looked across skill and will, and we found a few people who were willing to come in at like a very compromised remuneration and for higher ESOPs,
Mm-hmm.
right? At the same time, for certain roles, we realize that, maybe we have to like do away with the skill and think more about the will. Like, is that person curious? Is that person hungry to learn? Is that person like really like aligned to the mission of what we are building, excited about what we are building, right? So I think I think every team member is different, right? I hate this term people use called resources, because people are not resources. People are individuals, right? And therefore, you have to look at each individual team member you're hiring for their strengths, their specific personal circumstances, and their ability to absorb a risk. So whether they can go for like a compensation structure that's more ESOP driven than like, let's say, fixed salary / sort of regular sort of payment driven, and also the ability to learn, right? So whether the person who's coming in, maybe someone you're hiring more for the will than the skill, and you both are very aligned as a team member and the founder, that the person doesn't know the tools yet.
Yes.
But in like about a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever, will pick up the tools because she or he is really hungry to learn, right? So I think I think like sort of summarizing this whole piece, how like this is like broadly like I think the way we approached it, like philosophically, which was that each individual team member will have a different journey, and therefore how do you create a for the benefit of the company as well as for like the benefit and the comfort of the team member, how do you create a construct that's most relevant for him or her as part of the company, and set expectations accordingly. I think the second thing more tactically we did was the first set of hires were all through referrals, except for a few sort of outbound, like Facebook or LinkedIn posts, but mainly through referrals. And I think that really is important, because the more you go through referrals, and I think especially with the first set of founding team members, it's important because, there is eventually building a company or doing anything in a team is a social construct, right? That's what it is. Right. So it's a social construct, it's a social contract, right, between you and that person. Right. And if there is a third party involved as well, who's kind of like been the one to refer you, with whom that other person also has a social contract with, you can't break two social contracts at the same time. Right. So you won't mess around with the company you join, basically.
Yeah.
Right. So we use referrals very, very, we continue to use referrals, by the way. And I think we found our smartest, most, I think, ambitious team members through referrals.
Absolutely. And in your experience with the investors, when you pitched them the idea after the friends and family round, how much of their focus was on the idea and the scalability as opposed to pure financial projections?
So, I mean, financial projections, honestly, is, I think, people ask for it because it's more of a way to test how you are approaching the business, right? Like typically, if you ask a seasoned investor, when they look at a financial projection, they'll double the expenses and they'll half the revenues anyway, right? So it's not really like, and like the financial projection is not really something that they look at in terms of saying, oh, until you reach a certain advanced stage, right? In the beginning, especially, it's more about how are you approaching the problem statement, because a financial projection is a very important way of laying out a thought process. Like, where will you be spending your time? Where will your team be spending their time? Right? How do you approach making money? What's your philosophy around it? Right? What's your philosophy around user growth? Right? In my case, for instance, right? So I think the financial projection is an indication of philosophically where you lie as a founder, and how you're constructing your thought process lies, and how you think about allocating resources, right? Versus saying that this is going to be like $100 million or $1 billion company in the next 5 years. I don't think people are looking at that, right? As much as the approach. So I think that's especially important in the first set of conversations. I think up to like Series A for sure. Series A for sure. And Series B is more about revenues and hitting milestones, right? So that's the first thing. So to specifically answer your question on financial projections, why is that important, right? I think what is again important is that, when in making a very basic pitch deck, right? It's actually a very important way for you and your team to force down your thoughts again on what you're doing and what you're not doing. Because, when you start building, everything looks like candy and you want all of it, right? You're like, this space is so exciting, that space is so exciting, let's get in there, The point is, you have to say no's a lot more often. And when you have like maybe 10 pages of a pitch deck to make, you're able to articulate what your yeses are and what your no's are. and that the pitch deck is actually a reflection of that conversation having happened and the thought process having happened, right? So I think, again, investors look at all that you're saying no to, especially at early stages.
Yeah.
And then they're like, okay, I think very, very sorted, extremely focused on what the yeses are, right? And I think the third thing is, of course, the conversation you have with the investor and the way you had that conversation, right? So if you can have that conversation, I mean, of course, I think investors in India today are woke enough to have a conversation if you reach out to them through LinkedIn, which is really what I did when I moved back, because I didn't have any connects at that point in time,
Okay.
right? I mean, I discovered that I had entrepreneurs from the McKinsey network much later, right? I didn't even know that, I had fellow entrepreneurs from the McKinsey network, early on. And when I started reaching out to them, I was like, oh, you guys are here, you're building something, this is interesting, right? And then, they introduced me to their investors, etc., right? That's how things moved. But in the very first set of days, I actually reached out on LinkedIn, and I'd heard about, for instance, someone called Arihan Patni, who was this investor who was doing some really cool investments. I heard about a Mumbai Angels, which at that point in time was the angel group to go to and pitch at. So I figured out ways on LinkedIn to reach out to people and say hey, listen, I want to spend 5 minutes, I'll do a call, I'll come meet you for coffee, do whatever it takes. So I think that was one of the ways of meeting people, and people actually like that a lot because they feel that you're hungry.
Yeah.
But I think the second, of course, most, again, effective ways and shorter ways to go through referrals.
Absolutely. And also, in your experience with working with VC firms, beyond capital, what kind of support can an entrepreneur expect?
Yeah. So I actually use my board and my investors very, very strategically. So let me give you a sense of some of the angels that we actually got onto the cap table and why we got them on, right? So as part of one of our rounds, we actually got in some amazing angels like Anand Chandrasekharan, who was the chief product officer of Snapdeal at one point in time, was at Facebook building out the messenger platform, working directly with the leadership team there. He's an investor in some other really amazing startups in India, right? The reason we were very excited to get him on as an angel was because he's in the Valley. He's extremely deeply connected to the product ecosystem and to the tech ecosystem in the Valley and in India, right? And to the investor ecosystem in both places, right? So it was a very sort of, he's a great person, of course. But I think also getting him on was very exciting for us because it would give us exposure to a much broader set of a universe than what our current networks gave us access to, right? Another person we brought on, for instance, was Anant Narayanan, who was the former CEO of Myntra, is now the CEO of MedLife, right? Again, is a prolific angel investor. The reason we brought him on again was, Myntra is a very specific fashion brand, right? It's focused on a certain user demographic, right? So, as we thought about BabyChakra and how do we start building out our private labels, right? We thought it would be a really valuable person to get on board and sort of advise us on that journey of branding and brand building, right? So I think, you sort of think about your investors from a perspective on how can they help you get better as an entrepreneur and as a founding team in what you do, right? So that's one way to think about your investor and your cap table and the structure of it thereof, right? The second way to think about it is investors, especially institutional funds, right, have pitches coming into them every day, right? People pitch them all the time, right? So what ends up happening is that right now we're actually looking for a role, which is the chief of revenue role for the private label piece. And I'm actually going back to the conversations that my investors have introduced us to with entrepreneurs who today might be shutting down their companies, right? But are looking at joining other startups that are exciting and doing cool things, right? So they know those companies, they know the companies, they know the entrepreneurs, they know the hustle, they're able to sort of pattern match and say, these are the 5 entrepreneurs we talked to. We didn't invest in them, but these are really good people to join BabyChakra today and sort of build out this and be part of your team, right? So access to sort of human capital, access to talent, access to, just I think getting 5 steps ahead in your thought process. I think that's what you look at institutional investors for as well, right? I'm actually we recently hired for a chief of staff. We had about 1,500 applications. It was insane. I use my board very, very extensively to shortlist and to interview the final set of candidates, right? Because again, investors meet so many people, so they pattern match very, very well, right? So I think that's how you can use your investors extremely effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of BabyChakra in particular, first of all, what was the problem or the opportunity that you wanted to address when you launched BabyChakra? And so far, how have you gone about achieving that vision?
Sure. So, Tanvi, the idea is very simple. It's about how do you create a companion for families today as they go through the journey of pregnancy and childcare, right? And the reason for that stems from the fact that you're looking around you and all of us live in nuclear families. Most of us, at least like 70% of India lives in nuclear families, right? So you're turning online constantly. But where do you go? You typically like try and Google search something, or you get like these random forwards on WhatsApp, or you join some Facebook groups, right? But where is the trusted information for an Indian family on how to raise your child in the best way possible, right? And by the way, Indian family is not just also homogeneous Indian family, right? I mean, like a mother in Tamil Nadu or a mother in Chennai, for instance, right, has a very different way of raising her child than a mother in Chandigarh, right? Because of like the food she feeds her child, or the ecosystem she's surrounded with, or the myths, or the the customs of that particular local region, etc., right? So how do you do that, and sort of democratize this knowledge around childcare and maternity in a very fun, non-judgmental, non-medical feeling way, right? In a way that feels fun, that you want to learn, right? That feels like a community. That's what we built eventually,
Yeah.
right? So we built a community of trusted sort of partners, be it mothers and dads, who are connecting with each other and learning from each other and learning from the platform through conversations. Also doctors, we have more than 2,000 pediatricians and gynacs who are on the platform today, who constantly do like video live chats, who do like consultations, etc., and sort of guide parents in the right direction for the right choices for their
Yeah.
children, right? So that's really the sort of the genesis of BabyChakra. Yeah.
Absolutely. And since you cater to such a specific audience, what was your customer acquisition strategy like offline and online?
So, while we say it's a specific audience, I think two or three data points that I do want to share, Tanvi, which are actually quite fascinating. The first one is that India is actually, it is the largest birth cohort in the world, right? In the world. It actually is a higher birth cohort. It means children born every year than even China, right? So India actually has 27.6 million kids born every year, which means if I'm looking across 6 years that I'm serving them, 6 to 7 years that I'm serving them, like right from pregnancy to when the child is about 5 or 6 years of age, you're looking at about give or take like 130 million families you can serve, right? In 1 year,
Absolutely.
in 1 year, right?
Yeah.
That's ridiculously big, right? That means every third family pretty much in India could potentially, be a BabyChakra customer as well,
Mhm.
right? So it's actually a very, very large market. And
Yeah.
I think that's what's really exciting about it, because it's such a large market, but no one understands. They all think of it as extremely niche, right? And I'm like, great, right? So that's the first piece that's really exciting. The second piece that's really exciting is actually the fact that um, when you think about the audience and the user segment, right? They are now coming online in a very big way, right? So if you look at and there is really no competition online, right? If you look
Mhm.
at competition online, like I mean, if you look at competition, the competition actually exists in like the word of mouth. You go to your bhabhi, you go to your mother-in-law, you go to your sasu ma, whatever, right? And you basically ask for advice, right? But online, like, who's the definitive player in parenting, pregnancy, childcare for India, right? I mean, we'd like to believe it's us, right? But there is no other name that really comes to mind, right? And I
Mhm.
think that's what's really exciting about it, because it's like actually like it's a big bet we've taken that we are going to be the definitive place, the one-stop destination for every family coming into pregnancy or thinking about pregnancy, coming into BabyChakra, right? And coming to BabyChakra. So I
Yeah.
think that's sort of what is really exciting about us. And the market is very big and extremely fragmented, Tanvi. So, I mean, if you think about it, it's a market that's growing, I mean, at like 25% CAGR year on year, which is, it's counter-cyclical. Because, I mean, even through COVID, like your needs, like diapers are not like, you don't buy less diapers. Your child still needs diapers, for instance, right? Or baby food, right? And new niches emerging as well, right? And I think that's, again, extremely exciting, because the market actually is about a $54 billion market. It's fragmented. There's no one brand that really stands out, either in products or services, right? I mean, you just have a few incumbents like a Johnson and Johnson or maybe a Himalaya, but apart from that, just think, I mean, like literally you will not be able to name five big large scale baby brands on your like you will not be able to name them, right,
Mhm.
at scale, right? So I think it's an extremely exciting opportunity, and that's what I think keeps me excited. Yeah, so and I think in terms of your question, how do you acquire them, it's tough to initially, but I think now we have a bit of a flywheel going, right? So there are three ways that we acquire our users. One, actually very interesting is actually through doctor referrals. So 20% of our users actually come refer to us by their doctors, because doctors partner with us and they love the platform, and they tell the parents that you might want to get on a BabyChakra, because it actually gives you step by step advice through the course of pregnancy and parenting.
Yeah, that's
Right?
clever.
Yeah, so that's been one acquisition channel that's been really organic and worked great for us. High trust again. The second, of course, again, interestingly, is word of mouth. And that we do in a very concerted way now through influencers. So through other mom influencers or through large sort of, celebrity influencers, social media influencers. But equally, I think we see a lot of parents come in through the existing user base, right? So there are a lot of referrals, and we have a very clearly mapped out referral strategy on the app, which actually has been very successful for us, right? And the third is like really optimizing our paid and organic sort of digital acquisition channels, right? So, we've really sort of worked hard on our ASO, on our SEO. We worked very, very hard on our optimizing of sort of app acquisition campaigns. We figured out like also content marketing, how to sort of pay for it in a very optimized way. So these are things that you learn over time, right? And I think that's something that we've learned over time.
Absolutely. Naiyya, would you be open to extending the conversation for 5 or 10 more minutes? Because we have one last question and we can open to the
Sure.
audience.
We're
Will that
happy
be
to do that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So one last question and we'll open it to the audience. So what is BabyChakra's revenue model, if you can tell me that in totality? Like how have you explored monetization through brand associations on your platform, for example? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So we have two sources of revenue. One is, like you very correctly said, the brand associations, right? So the fact that we have such a large community of parents on our platform who've come looking to learn is a great opportunity for brands also to connect with them, right? At a very critical point in their time of life, right? So, we have all sorts of brands, right? From FMCG to, all the consumer goods companies, to BFSI companies, because insurance suddenly, as a parent, you become a lot more aware of like the fact that life is fragile, right? Or like you to like invest in future for your child, right? So I think those are the insurance companies are a very big part of the folks who kind of work with us, and we create sort of solutions for them. We also have, of course, like a lot of healthcare partners, right? Because again, when you're going through pregnancy, you're going through parenting, nutrition, immunity, hygiene, health, all of these become top of mind choices, right? I mean, as just a married couple, you don't really think so much about that, right? But the minute you start, you realize you're pregnant, you start thinking about fertility or conception, or you have a child at home, you start thinking about all of these aspects, right? So these are all partners that work with us, and we create very interesting solutions for them, where we always, I think one North Star we use is that how do you really add value to the parent's life when the brand communicates with them, right? So that's something we hold dear. So we've never done things like, regular banner ads or things like, spamming, like, people with like SMSs from a brand. We don't do all that kind of stuff. We do things, we create solutions which add value to people who are being exposed to them. And we're also able to target and personalize extremely well, right? Because we are an intelligent platform. We have algos that we can put. The entire BabyChakra platform is highly personalized and highly relevant to each user who uses us, right? So right down from like life state, so whether you're 6 months pregnant or like you're 6 weeks pregnant, right? Or whether you have a 6-year-old baby, right? I mean, you can really target down there. Language that you're using, locality you're coming from, whether you're a father or a mother, whether we know which kind of handsets you use, so we know kind of like the sort of the demographic in terms of even like the ability to spend, the ability to purchase, the kind of questions you've asked before. So we're able to target very, very well. And of course, all of this is done at an anonymized sort of aggregate level. And we allow absolutely no cookies in any of these conversations, right? So that's the first thing around brands that we're able to do. The second thing that we've started doing is actually we built out a marketplace, and we tested the marketplace out last year. And that was actually very, very successful. And we realized that parents were actually writing and saying, but we want more. We want BabyChakra products. So very interestingly, Tanvi, like way back in November, we saw all these patterns and data and insights that came from our community, which basically indicated they wanted a lot of products around hygiene and health, right? Which was, again, I think natural, given that's the platform we were focused on building out, right? And you will not believe this is in November, right? We actually we started working on 3 products. One was actually a baby safe hand sanitizer. The second was actually a baby safe hand wash. And the third was actually a fruit, vegetable and toys wash, right? And this was like pre-COVID, like we didn't like predict COVID or anything, right? And we launched this, and the whole process of branding, marketing, pricing, positioning was done with a community of both parents and experts. We launched this in March, and that's when actually COVID hit. And like, actually, we launched on Amazon and BabyChakra. Amazon actually blocked us for 3 days, saying that it's impossible. You're a brand new brand. You've not spent money on marketing. How are you getting this level of crazy demand? It's impossible. There must be some jol happening, right? So they actually blocked us. I had to call up like all my networks in Amazon saying, listen, we're not doing anything wrong. Like really, this is really product market fit on steroids, right? So I think that's the power of data and insights, right? And that's something we want to do more of going forward. Really build out like private label products like micro labels, which address the whole spectrum of needs for a parent through pregnancy and parenting.
Absolutely. No, so I think that was my last question. Thank you so much. I think we have so many insights from you. I'll just quickly move on to the audience questions. So we have the first one from Mahesh. He is asking, is there any circle of VCs, angels, influencers that a founder should find and chase? And how does this ecosystem work? How has your experience been? A follow-up to that question is it life cycle of a customer very short? Okay, this is another question, so we'll take that later.
Okay. So, Mahesh, don't chase anyone, please. Don't chase anyone. I think, seriously, don't chase anyone. I mean, you're the talent. If you're building, you're the talent. You will add value. You will create something big and create a big outcome for people who decide to partner with you, right? Don't chase anyone. I think what you need to think about is reversing that equation a little bit. Figure out what is it that you want to build. What will you do? What are the steps you will do that will make it successful? And what do you need in your team? And who do you need in your team to make that happen, right? As you continue to do that, what ends up happening is when you are successful and when things start moving and you start seeing a lot of traction or very strong product market fit, investors and angels actually have large armies of people that they deploy to find and to look for indicators of new emerging companies that are successful. And you will see a lot of like inbound interest in you, right? So I think instead of focusing on like identifying any inner circle or anything of VCs or angels or any of that, I think focus first on the inner circle of people who are going to be building this company out with you, right? And the minute you do that, right, I think the equation, when it reverses, right, it's very powerful, very, very powerful. Because then, I mean, like, I told you about my struggle to, when I moved back to India, like actually reach out to a few people on LinkedIn, etc. Right? But the reason I reached out to them was not to raise money. It was more to understand, like, they were working in maybe had invested in areas allied to mine, right? I wanted to understand patterns and trends and, what they found were interesting opportunities or like discuss my approach with them, right? The minute you start reaching out to folks with the motivation to learn, and the minute they talk to you and they're like, oh my God, he or she's really got a very good understanding of what's happening. I think the equation you want to really build with people is actually one where they respect you, right? And chasing them will not build that respect, right? So I think in more ways than one, don't chase people. Find your inner circle of people who are going to help you build what you need to build from your team's perspective. And secondly, I think these guys have enough and more scouts out there looking for promising ventures, and they will reach out to you.
We have another one from Sikta. She is asking, I'm sure you must have had many ideas. How do you test them out, and how do you select and make them more concrete?
Sorry, did you say like many ideas on what exactly?
Just for startup ideas, basically.
So how did I select BabyChakra?
No. Yeah, like she's asking, like how basically you must have had many ideas to start off with,
yeah.
And how do you test them out? And for BabyChakra, yes, how do you test them out and select some and make them more concrete?
So I think the different cuts to the Sikta, and I think it's never like the right answer either. But I think the cuts that I made, if it's helpful at all, I'll share with you. One is where do I have an area of personal like passion, drive, like an ambition to build something in, right? I think that's the first cut you need to make, because it's when you decide to be an entrepreneur, it's going to be a journey that's going to take you at least 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 15 years, right? To see it through. And therefore there'll be many lows, many highs. And I think the idea is that if the idea and if the vision of what you're creating is exciting, you will stick to it, right? So I think first, take your time, take all the time you need, but figure out what is it that excites you most as an individual and as an entrepreneur, right? The second, I think, cut is obviously like, I might be interested in something, but it's really not going to create any value, right? And it's not a monetizable model, or it's not something people will pay for. I think then you like do that cut very, very smartly and very objectively with people you trust as well, or maybe with yourself, and say that, is it something that can actually become a very large, valuable company, right? And if not, then question whether, go back to the first question and say, then what I'm passionate about, can it be a hobby, or can it be more of a lifestyle business versus like being something that is a different kind of an entrepreneurship endeavor, right? I think third also, of course, like, through all your conversations, be it peers or be it with people who've invested in the space, figure out the competitive environment. Because, I think, one of the biggest blessings you can have is having amazing competition. But one of the most, I think, tricky things could be if you're a laggard who's come in and the space is already taken, right? And you're spending a lot of your time and a lot of your effort in building for a problem that's already solved, right? So I think these are the three cuts I would take. Yeah, I think that's really where I'd go.
There's another one by Mahesh. He asked, isn't life cycle of your customers very short, around 3 to 4 years? How do you justify the retention cost?
So great question, Mahesh. And sounds like you've had a bit of an investing background, because that's a very typical question I get from investors as well. So, the deal is this, right? I mean, when you look across different business models, there are two ways of looking at it, right? First is that, am I able to have like a longitudinal, like an LTV, which is based on like a lot of frequent transactions through a shorter span, right? That justifies the CAC, right? And these are frequent, but these are also large transactions. It's not like it's a small transaction, right? It's not like I'm buying like like a postpaid, like I'm not buying a recharge, right? I'm actually investing in my child, and I'm going to be doing a lot of frequent purchases for my child, which are limited maybe to 6 years or whatever, 4 to 5 to 6 years. But it's going to be frequent in that period in time. It's going to be large, right? And if that's going to be the case, then it justifies my CAC, right? So that's the way we've approached it, right? This is really what we see play out in BabyChakra, right? It works, right? The CAC LTV ratio is extremely healthy, right? The second way I would look at it is that, how is your CAC happening, right? Because that's a very fundamental question. If you're acquiring people only through paid, right? So I talked about the three ways in which we're acquiring people, right? If we were only relying on paid acquisition to grow our user base and to acquire new and new users, at a certain threshold, right, my CAC would not justify my LTV, right? Because my CAC would be so expensive. Like for me to really drill down and find that relevant specific mother who is going through pregnancy right now, right? If it was only through paid marketing, my CAC would be very, very high if that was the only way I was acquiring customers, right? So I think your organic channels really, it's like a portfolio, right? Once your organic channels start growing very well, then your CAC costs also reduce over time, right? So frankly, as we've scaled, there are 2 or 3 trends we've noticed, right? Not every user who comes in will therefore have the same LTV that maybe the earlier cohort of healthy users had, right? Not everyone's going to be there for maybe 4, 5, 6 years, right? They might be there for maybe 2 years, right? Or maybe for a year, right? So I think then because of the organic CAC having grown as much as it has, the actual cost of acquisition has actually decreased a lot for my user on a blended basis, right? So I think that's how we've approached it. I think just one thought though there is that if I just take away the CAC LTV ratio, right? Keep in mind, I'm also building a brand, right? And it's a brand that stands for trust. It stands for companionship. It stands for having a partnership with a family at a time where they need it most. So one thing we took away, like for instance, when we call up customers on Amazon, right? And we said, why do you buy us on Amazon when we didn't do any marketing, right? They said, because we know BabyChakra, no? We don't use your app anymore, but we love the brand. We trust the brand. And when we saw your products were out, we had to buy these products versus the other competitor products out there, right? So I think, again, like, I think the third piece that you might want to think about is when you're maybe also not seeing CAC LTV ratios work out for whatever reason, which they should ideally work out. But I think you should also say that some of these investments will go in brand building. And in the future, there is a way you can monetize that brand.
Absolutely. I think we'll just take one last question to cover it all, and because we are at 8:40 right now. So yeah, overall, there are lots of many questions, but we'll take that up later. But just to round it up, what are the 3 hacks that you would give entrepreneurs that are listening to this conversation, or key advice that you think it really helped you?
Um, I think the first hack is show up always. Like, don't call back and go back into bed. Like, don't do that. Don't do that, because life is always going to be ups and downs, and I think and it's fine, right? I mean, you set out for a journey. When you're like 95, you look back and you're like, my God, I built something like that. It was amazing, right? So don't curl back into bed. Like, show up to work, show up to that meeting, show up and pitch, show up to a conversation, show up, right? I think it's important. Show up for your team when they need you, etc. I think the second, not hack, but I think a life lesson is that things are not always going to be fair. Make your peace with it. Of course, over time, make things fair for the other people who come after you. Make it fair for them. It's extremely important you do that. It's part of our sort of social contract with the world at large, but it's not always going to be fair. And like, the buck stops with you. You have to make the best out of any situation you're put in, right? It's this is, I think, the core tenet of entrepreneurship. There's a core tenet of professionalism. There's a core tenet of being able to build anything, right? So I think that's the second thing I'd say. And I think the third is like, you're not alone. Everyone's going through ups and downs. All these glitzy, glamorous stories you see, everyone is going through some up, some down, right? So you're not alone in this, right? And I mean, just be cognizant of that. Don't get swayed by the glitz and glamour of entrepreneurship. Equally, don't get pulled into this vacuum, which is like, oh my God, life really sucks. Like, it's just maintain equanimity, maintain even keel, as much as possible, and have your friends and family and like networks of entrepreneurs around you to help you do that.
Absolutely. I think that answers it all. Thank you so much, Naiyya, for all these amazing insights. I think we've learned a lot from you in this session, and hope you've had fun answering our questions as well.
Yeah, it's been fun. I mean, I'm so happy we could do this.
Yeah, absolutely. We had so many questions, and this is the first founder speaker series that we are doing. So we got a
Okay.
lot of insights from you, and hopefully we'll keep continuing this and go on to more concrete subjects like accelerators, incubators, and how to even go about VC funding. But I think some of your answers that you've talked about, some of the things that you've talked about, will definitely help us understand that better.
Sure. No, I'm happy to help in any way. I mean, reach out to me. Tanvi has my details. Reach out to me. The next few weeks are a little crazy, but I think after that, I mean, would be happy to sort of connect one-on-one and help anyone out that's, has any questions or do any brainstorming is needed.
Thank you so much for that support.
Thank